Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to Denali National Park in central Alaska once again. The park's highway travels from Anchorage in the south to Fairbanks in the north. As the highway skirts Denali, the Denali Park Road heads west and takes travelers for about 50 miles through the park's heart. This road twists and turns along rivers and climbs to ridgetops featuring unsurpassed views of pristine territory. Given this road grants visitors such unparalleled access, it also brings hikers and photographers and all sorts of nature lovers. The lush green forests of poplar, birch, larch, and aspen trees accommodate stands of fir and spruce trees, leaving the banks of streams and rivers to willow and alder stands. With hiking trails breaking off from the road periodically, trekkers are free to access remote regions of the park to view moose, caribou, and sheep that wander the hillsides. As they climb and side-hill the trails, hikers are frequently not expecting to run into any of the predators of this area, which include bobcats, black bears, coyotes, lynx, wolves, and brown bears. Even in this peaceful and beautiful area, a close encounter of the clawed kind may leave a person in extreme peril. On July 21, 1972, 22-year-old Chris Cauble was enjoying a lonesome hike along the Toklat River about 1.5 miles south of the Denali Park Highway, just east of Divide Mountain. The gravel bars were easier to walk than some trails this time of year, as the plants grow quickly with the additional hours of daylight. Crowding the trail sides and blocking visibility for hikers means that the plants can be a real impediment to safety. As Chris navigated the gravel bar, he glanced ahead of him to make sure he didn't surprise any grizzly bears that may be feeding on salmon or berries along the river. About 3/4 of a mile ahead of him, he saw the shape of a massive grizzly bear stand out from the green plants surrounding it. It was located near the bottom of one of the hillsides, and Chris determined he would find a wide route around the bear to avoid any confrontation with it. After looking over the lay of the land, he decided on a route and headed in that direction. As he climbed, making sure to stay a few hundred yards away from the bear, he kept in mind the bear's approximate location with his. He'd hoped that he could find a spot uphill from the bears and watch it for a while, just to see what it was up to. As curiosity frequently does, it got the best of Chris. He'd hiked the route he'd planned on in hopes of avoiding the bear, but had the bear stayed where it was when Chris had started? What if the bear had unexpectedly decided to head up the hill in Chris's direction, and he didn't know it? Being so close to such a dangerous predator can play tricks on your mind, and all Chris needed was to rid himself of such anxious thoughts. Chris climbed a small knob and hoped that it would lend him a view of the bear's previous location. He took off his backpack and laid it at the bottom of the rise before stepping his way toward the point. His curiosity got the best of him as he leaned out over the knob and peered through the brush below him. As he searched the area below him, he suddenly saw a brown blur out of one of the corners of his eye. Chris craned his head toward the blur and noticed 2 half-grown grizzly cubs to his right, about 100 yards away from him. They were slowly making their way toward him. It occurred to him that if there were 2 cubs, then there must be at least one sow very near them. That is when his stomach tied itself into knots, and he had a sense of impending doom overwhelm him. Just as Chris had stepped back from the edge of the knoll, a huge sow grizzly bear stepped into view, only about 120 yards from him. She was down the hill from the cubs a short distance and seemed very concerned about how far from her they'd traveled. Chris tried to slink away before catching her eye, but grizzlies who don't pay attention don't survive. Chris was filled with terror as he watched the sow's head snap in his direction. Her intense gaze let him know that she was aware of his presence, and her actions let him know she was not happy about it. After only a few seconds of staring at him, the sow planted her back feet in the soil and took the first of only a few bounds toward him. Chris immediately began backing up and yelling at the sow. His only hope was that she was bluffing and only trying to frighten him away from her cubs. He quickly made his way down the slope a few yards, trying to escape from her line of sight. The sow covered the 120 yards between them in what may have only been 4 or 5 seconds. As soon as she got near Chris, she began swatting him with her massive paws and raking him with her claws. Near a large willow bush, the sow pushed Chris onto his back. Her claws had already torn gashes into his right leg, and her teeth tore a few more holes into it to boot. Chris immediately knew his best bet was to roll onto his stomach and remain still. He flipped over and covered his head and face with his arms, in hopes of limiting the damage done to them. Now face down, Chris could feel the angry sow slashing at his back and arms. She was biting anything that she could reach with her jaws and clawing anything else. Just as he felt her teeth tearing his scalp on the back of his head, the sow disappeared. Although her angry attack was a mere 5 seconds in length, it had done more damage to Chris's body than most car accidents. He could feel his blood seeping from wounds all over his body and the warmth of it as it ran down his cheeks. Chris was too afraid to look and see where the sow was. He lay there, frozen, and waiting for a follow-up attack, but it never came. The forest was silent, and the river churned below him. After several seconds, Chris peeked through his fingers at the surrounding brush. The worst-case scenario would be that he would see her sitting and staring at him from a few yards away, but she was nowhere to be found. Chris listened for any sign that the bears were nearby, but was met with silence. Over the next few minutes, Chris began to gain confidence that the sow had left him. He slowly rose to his knees and searched cautiously, just to make sure of his hopes. Once he was confident she was not near him, he slowly climbed to his feet. Chris's first thoughts must have been how to get out of there and back to safety and civilization as quickly as possible, but he still wasn't certain of the direction in which the bears had left. If they'd fled toward the Denali Park Road, then he might run right back into them. He soon realized that it was a chance he would have to take. Chris began to assess a few of his wounds that were easily examined. They were bad and painful, but they were not serious enough to prevent him from hiking out. Slowly and cautiously, he picked his way back through the brush and along the gravel bar toward the road. He would have about 1.5 miles of a hike to get to the safety of the road, and completed it in record time, while glancing over his shoulder the entire way. Once safely out, Chris was able to flag down other park visitors. He was transported to the hospital, where his wounds were cleaned and sutured closed. All told, the sow had left him with gashes on his right leg, along his arms, and across his back. Her teeth had punched large holes in his right leg and along parts of his back. She had also bitten the back of his head, though she did not crush his skull. Chris had battled a grizzly sow, and was left with the scars to prove it. As far as the sow and cubs go, there is no record of the rangers doing anything to kill or capture them. The sow's attack on Chris was viewed as a defensive attack, given that she was defending her cubs from a perceived threat. She'd left without burying Chris, and did not stick around to defend him as her food. After reviewing the harrowing details of this attack, I am left with a few questions for you. Would you consider hiking in Denali after hearing the details of Chris's attack? Do you think the cubs witnessed anything that they may repeat in their own lives? How much more damage could the sow have done to Chris in the few seconds she had him at her mercy? I'll be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.